Questa puntata è offerta da ActionAid. Gli Stati Uniti d'America compiono 250 anni e nella settimana di questo compleanno speciale la Corte Suprema ha ribadito un principio fondamentale, un principio che è uno di quelli che ha caratterizzato la storia americana. Chi nasce all'interno dei confini degli Stati Uniti continuerà ad aver diritto alla cittadinanza americana, a prescindere da dove vengono i genitori o se siano entrati negli Stati Uniti in modo legale o illegale. Sconfessando Donald Trump, la Corte ha salvato l'essenza dell'esperimento americano, il cui simbolo è la Statua della Libertà, quella che è sul porto di New York dal 1886 e simbolicamente accoglie tutti i migranti del mondo. Questa decisione è il modo migliore per cominciare un viaggio nella storia degli Stati Uniti, a cui è dedicata questa puntata speciale di Altre Storie Americane, in cui avremo anche un ospite che ci racconterà che cos'è per l'America il 4 luglio. Marco, la Corte Suprema ha deciso e ha bocciato un ordine esecutivo che Trump aveva firmato nel primo giorno del suo secondo mandato. Un ordine che negava la cittadinanza ai bambini nati negli Stati Uniti se i genitori erano entrati illegalmente oppure se lavoravano, vivevano negli Stati Uniti legalmente ma con visti temporanei. Quindi non solo i figli dei migranti non avrebbero avuto la cittadinanza, ma anche i figli di turisti, studenti stranieri, lavoratori stagionali, richiedenti asilo. Invece la Corte Suprema ha detto no, il 14° emendamento parla chiaro, sono tutti americani. Intanto Marco, che cosa significa? Che cos'è questo 14° emendamento? Perché c'è nella Costituzione? Perché la Costituzione americana ha deciso di scommettere sullo ius soli da così tanto tempo?
Mario, non c'è nessuna sentenza più americana di questa, si potrebbe dire. È significativo che arrivi proprio nel momento in cui si celebrano i 250 anni della Dichiarazione di indipendenza, perché quel 14° emendamento su cui si pronunciavano i giudici in questi giorni è un emendamento che ha richiesto al paese quasi un secolo di interrogativi su se stesso, ha richiesto decenni di elaborazione per capire come trasformare la promessa dei padri fondatori in quello che doveva essere uno Stato moderno ed è passato anche attraverso una guerra civile. È un emendamento che viene fatto subito dopo la guerra civile, devastante guerra civile, oltre 700.000 morti, ricordiamolo, alla metà dell'Ottocento. È pensato soprattutto per i neri, è pensato soprattutto per sanare questa enorme ferita legata alla schiavitù su cui il paese aveva sempre rinviato la soluzione, però diventa alla fine il vero DNA del paese, quello poi incarnato, come dicevi giustamente tu, dalla Statua della Libertà che arriverà una ventina di anni dopo a New York e che è il simbolo di accoglienza del paese. Il 14° emendamento dice che chiunque nasce sul suolo americano è cittadino americano. Trump chiedeva che fosse ridotto enormemente, che fossero tagliati fuori tutta una serie di bambini che hanno genitori con situazioni da risolvere, con visti temporanei, illegali e via dicendo. La Corte gli ha detto una cosa molto semplice: i tempi possono essere cambiati ma la Costituzione no, e la Costituzione resta quella, e il 14° emendamento non si supera, anche perché nel corso degli anni poi è stato ratificato e trasformato in leggi. Ecco perché questa è un po' la sentenza più americana che potessimo immaginare in questo momento. L'America fondamentalmente ha detto a se stessa di voler continuare ad essere quella che è sempre stata. Trump chiedeva un taglio netto e un cambio di passo.
Per darvi un'idea, negli Stati Uniti nascono più di 3,5 milioni di bambini l'anno e circa 250.000 sono quelli che si trovano in questa condizione. Questo avrebbe significato negare la cittadinanza americana a questi 250.000 e mettere però anche in discussione al rinnovo dei passaporti la cittadinanza di tutti quelli che l'avevano avuta ma i cui genitori appunto non avevano un titolo per stare negli Stati Uniti, soprattutto non per stare definitivamente. Ecco Marco, Noi siamo in questa puntata in cui parliamo dei 250 anni dell'America. Questa è stata la settimana delle sentenze della Corte Costituzionale, che ci hanno mostrato una cosa. Questa decisione, così come quella che avevano preso sui dazi, ci ha detto che la Corte Suprema è un contropotere, anche se la Corte Suprema ha una schiacciante maggioranza conservatrice, ricordiamo 6 conservatori contro 3, diciamo, progressisti. Di questi 6, 3 sono stati nominati da Donald Trump, però appunto ha preso 2 decisioni molto forti contro Trump, anche se ha appoggiato quest'anno molte scelte dell'amministrazione. Prima di passare al 4 luglio, Marco, ci dici un po' come vedi questo bilancio del rapporto tra i giudici e il presidente?
L'anno giudiziario della Corte si chiude il 30 giugno e si è chiuso con questa sentenza bomba, diciamo, perché era la più importante dell'anno. Però quest'anno hanno preso una sessantina di decisioni la Corte Suprema, che sono tantissime decisioni nel merito per i ritmi della Corte, e in generale Trump ha ottenuto tante cose. Ha ottenuto per esempio un allentamento delle regole sui finanziamenti alle campagne elettorali, che era ciò che cercava in vista della campagna di midterm, e non stiamo a spiegare perché, ma questo favorisce più i repubblicani che non i democratici. Ha ottenuto alcune sentenze che la sua base chiedeva con forza, tra le ultime quella su gli atleti transessuali e come possono partecipare o meno alle attività nelle scuole. Ha ottenuto alcune cose, però le 2 sentenze più importanti dell'anno sono state sui 2 temi chiave della sua politica, i dazi e l'immigrazione, le 2 grandi promesse di Trump, ed è significativo che i personaggi chiave che stanno emergendo in questa corte sono 2: il presidente John Roberts, che è stato eletto dal presidente Bush, quindi ormai è 20 anni che guida la corte e che ha firmato in prima persona le sentenze più delicate, e Amy Coney Barrett, che è una dei 3 giudici che lui ha scelto e che è quella che insieme a Roberts sta guidando, sta diventando l'ago della bilancia di questa corte. Che cosa ci dice la somma di queste 60 sentenze con 2 importanti? Ma a mio avviso ci dice che la corte, la giustizia, il potere giudiziario c'è, mette dei limiti, mette dei confini, e il potere esecutivo totale che Trump ha chiesto ha trovato, diciamo, il suo argine. Adesso tocca aspettare quantomeno novembre, le elezioni di midterm, per vedere se il terzo potere di cui abbiamo parlato tanto tra i 3 poteri, cioè quello legislativo, il Congresso, tornerà in campo. Però adesso abbiamo ricominciato a vedere che l'America non è solo potere esecutivo.
Bene Marco, detto questo, arriviamo a questo 250° anniversario degli Stati Uniti, perché era il 4 luglio del 1776 quando a Filadelfia 56 delegati firmarono un foglio di pergamena e fecero nascere un paese che non esisteva prima e che era tutto da inventare, un esperimento di democrazia, il primo di democrazia occidentale. Noi questa puntata la stiamo registrando alla vigilia e oggi avremo un ospite che tu, Marco, hai intervistato, che ci racconta come gli americani festeggiano davvero questa giornata, le tradizioni, la grigliata, i fuochi artificiali, le feste con i vicini, come festeggiano questo giorno dell'indipendenza. Ricordiamo dell'indipendenza dal re d'Inghilterra. Ma prima, Marco, mi piacerebbe ricordare un po' il contesto in cui cade questo compleanno, perché è un paese che arriva a compiere un quarto di millennio. Teoricamente la festa dovrebbe essere facile. Quando ha compiuto 200 anni era il 1976 e fu grande festa, anche se arrivavamo dopo anni di scontri, contestazione, la guerra del Vietnam. Eppure fu una grande festa che unificò il paese e elesse un presidente come Jimmy Carter, che era un pacificatore. Invece oggi la sensazione è completamente diversa. Il paese è spaccato, diviso, polarizzato come poche volte nella sua storia, e c'è un numero che mi ha colpito molto. Un americano su 3, soltanto 1 su 3, pensa che il sogno americano esista ancora. Marco, mi racconti cosa c'è nella pancia dell'America?
Ma Mario, io negli anni, e anche tu, negli anni in cui vivevo negli Stati Uniti, sentivo raccontare in maniera anche un po' mitica il famoso bicentenario del 1976. Questo momento di riunificazione del paese dopo quegli anni difficili che descrivevi, e provavo a immaginarmi nel corso del tempo come sarebbe stato l'anniversario successivo, i 250 anni, perché ci sono stati dei momenti particolari. I 50 anni della storia americana sono stato un momento decisivo per cambiare il passo del paese. Il centenario è stato importantissimo, i 150 anni sono stati vissuti con grande intensità, i 200 anni furono un momento di riappacificazione. Non mi sarei mai aspettato di arrivare ai 250 anni e vedere un'America così divisa, un'America che non riesce a festeggiare, dove nella pancia del paese c'è metà paese che sostiene di voler festeggiare solo l'Independence Day, ma senza pensare troppo a chi sta guidando il paese in questo momento, e l'altra metà che ha organizzato una serie di festeggiamenti fondamentalmente abbastanza di parte, senza coinvolgere gli altri. È un paese che ha perso un po' il senso di quella narrazione che era nata 250 anni fa. C'è chi aspetta con più entusiasmo di capire se davvero il 4 luglio si sposerà Taylor Swift al Madison Square Garden, che non che cosa succederà sul Mall, che dovrebbe essere il luogo delle memorie collettive a Washington. Quindi nella pancia del paese c'è grande attesa per dire: andiamo oltre questo appuntamento, non è riuscito a rappacificarci, non è riuscito a riunirci, vediamo se più avanti riscopriremo che cos'è che veramente ci tiene insieme.
Dobbiamo dire anche che è un'America ed è un momento in cui Donald Trump sta celebrando così tanto se stesso e usa questa occasione per le celebrazioni, che questo rende difficile una convergenza. Simbolico è questo passaporto speciale fatto per i 250 anni, in cui su una pagina ci sono le immagini dei padri fondatori e dall'altra c'è la faccia di Donald Trump con la sua famosa e gigantesca firma. E anche il fatto, guardando tutti i sondaggi di questi giorni, sono stati inondati di sondaggi fatti negli Stati Uniti che ci dicono che il presidente ha un tasso di popolarità che è il più basso raggiunto da lui, ma dice anche una cosa, che un americano su due teme di essere in pericolo di perdere diritti e libertà democratiche. Ecco, secondo me questo è un sintomo di malessere. Gli americani hanno in grande maggioranza sempre creduto di vivere nel paese diciamo migliore del mondo dal punto di vista delle libertà, e questo qua è un dato che colpisce.
E io suggerisco, per chi ha voglia di approfondire un po' questo periodo storico americano che celebriamo, è appena uscita una serie su Netflix, 5 puntate, l'esperimento americano, dove si scopre, si vede cosa era successo nel 1776 e dopo, e come proprio questo tema che dicevi, Mario, dei diritti fosse la grande paura che avevano anche dopo essersi liberati dal dominio della Gran Bretagna. Non a caso fecero una Costituzione che però non aveva quello che si chiama il Bill of Rights, quei 10 emendamenti che sostengono tutti i diritti, e fecero fatica a ratificarla fino a quando non si misero d'accordo che andavano tutelati dei diritti che venivano dati per scontati. Ecco, oggi c'è, come dicevi tu, di nuovo un interrogativo su i nostri diritti sono tutelati o no, ma c'è un interrogativo anche sul tema della democrazia, della Repubblica, e di che cosa sia questo esperimento americano che appunto dovrebbe essere arrivato a un tagliando importante con i 250 anni, ma è ancora tutto da scoprire.
Bene Marco, io passerei al tuo ospite, dico il tuo perché lo hai intervistato tu, per capire diciamo quelle che sono invece le tradizioni che uniscono anziché dividere. Tu hai intervistato il console generale degli Stati Uniti a Milano, Douglas Benning, che è un uomo della Georgia e ci porta il racconto di che cosa è questa giornata per gli americani e anche per esempio che cos'è nel suo stato. Tra l'altro la Georgia è una delle 13 colonie che il 4 luglio di 250 anni fa firmarono la Dichiarazione di indipendenza. Abbiamo Tu hai fatto un'intervista in inglese. Abbiamo deciso di lasciare questa intervista in inglese per preservarne anche, diciamo, la genuinità. Ma voi potete seguirla sia su YouTube che su Spotify con i sottotitoli in italiano. Naturalmente dovete andare sulla pagina di Cora Media. Buon ascolto.
Consul General Benning, thank you for being with us and welcome to Altre Storie Americane.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
So let's start with a few questions. There are a lot of things that we want to discuss about this anniversary. You were born in Georgia, a state with a unique connection, I would say, to American history, from the Revolution to the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement. When you think about the 250 anniversary, 250 years of the United States, does that history feel personal to you? Is there a particular moment from Georgia's past that comes to mind when you reflect on what America has become?
Absolutely. Georgia was one of the original 13 colonies. It actually began as a debtor colony where England would send some folks from their prisons over to sort of start the new world there in back in the 1700s. But it has become very, I think, symbolic of a lot of what the United States really means. You mentioned during the Revolution, there were obviously some key battles then during the Civil War between the North and the South in the United States. There was perhaps one of the most iconic moments of the fight between the North and the South, where General Sherman marched from Atlanta to Savannah and sort of put an end to that particular difficult period in our history. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin just outside of Savannah, Georgia, sort of creating an industry that then relied on slavery for Georgia's economic prosperity and growth. So from that time through to the Civil Rights Movement, Martin Luther King Jr. Was born in Atlanta, Georgia, the capital of Georgia. So, and now Georgia is an economically vibrant state but also a huge political battleground, kind of reflecting the diversity of political views in the United States. So what I'd say the moment that for me really carries the most weight now at the time of our anniversary, it is that Civil Rights Movement, where the country moved from a time when not all of us were being treated equally, where a certain part of the population was treated much less, with much less liberty, much less freedom, but that the Atlanta churches and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. really created the Civil Rights Movement, which brought the United States in a very real way into a more modern era where we are all Americans, and we are all Americans who are still striving to both be treated equally and have equal access to all of the rights of every American citizen.
I will come again to this point because you have already raised very important points. But first of all, let me ask you, for the Italian listener who may not be following all the celebration, can you explain what the 250th anniversary marks and what makes it different from a typical 4th of July? Do you think there is something different this year, or is more an official top-down celebration?
No, there's certainly something different this year. This year marks the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, which all Americans sort of recognize as the moment when our country at that time sort of declared itself to be separate from its colonial masters in England, the movement away from the monarchy to a democracy. So, and Americans, like everybody in the world, like good round numbers. I am a child of the bicentennial in 1976, which was an equally huge celebration for us. So it's a time for us to really reflect on the accomplishments and the challenges that we face as a country in a very real way, but also to celebrate the origins of what we've been striving to become over the past 250 years.
And talking about the Declaration of Independence, you were already mentioning before the Civil Rights Movement and your experience in Georgia. The Declaration says that all men are created equal, but here there is already something related to, let's say, the contradiction that are related to the American history. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words that then historians say he himself enslaved somewhere between 600 and 700 people at Monticello. After 250 years, how does America come to terms with this foundational contradiction? Is it a wound that has healed or one that is still open?
Well, I think you've used the right word in this context, which is the contradiction. The country was started based on some very powerful ideals about equality, and about freedom, and about access to rights and liberties. But it also, as you say, was founded economically, particularly on enslaving people. So I can't say that is something that the country has overcome in the past 250 years. But one thing that makes me very proud as an American is that we are always willing to look with open eyes at where we come from, and to talk about the ways in which we can improve our society and our culture, and our government, so that all men who are created equal are in fact approaching that kind of equality. Slavery is a very central part of the history of the United States of America, but it is not sort of the end of that history. Over the years, we have enacted many real changes in our society and culture, and many legal steps have been taken to create that equality in a very real way. The amendments to the Constitution after the Civil War eliminated chattel slavery. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 enshrined equality across races. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 banned discrimination in housing. So I would say that this is something that we continue to work on, and that we will never forget, but that we have been making progress and we're trying to move in the right direction.
And I want to stay on this point because I wonder, in your personal experience as a diplomat who has spent a career representing this country abroad, how do you explain America's story to people who point, for example, to the gap between the promise of the Declaration of Independence and the reality? Is it the story of a promise being gradually fulfilled or something more complicated?
Well, I have to say that nothing makes you more patriotic than living outside of your country and having to explain it to a skeptical audience. That is what diplomacy is. That is what we do. I have spent the past 30 years explaining things about my country, but the advantage that gives me as an American is that I do have to think a lot about my country, warts and all, as we say. That there are challenges that the country continues to face. There are difficulties that we have to continue to try to overcome, and so I have spent a lot of time thinking about that. And the one thing that I often say, because I truly believe it, is that the story of the United States is the story of addressing challenges, of moving forward in real and concrete ways to make ourselves a better country. The ideals that we talk about a lot, we feel very deeply as well. As Martin Luther King Jr. actually said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it always bends towards justice. I believe that to be true. So when we see the country went through a terrible civil war that was the most extreme example of the country trying to come to grips with what it wanted to be collectively. It was not easy. Many people died in that conflict. But that is an example, an extreme example of how our country has tried to remain true to its foundational principles. And I think that we continue to move towards justice and equality over the long term.
Thank you for this description, because it's also what struck us. Together with Mario, we are two American lovers from a certain point of view, so we try to describe the country with this eye, looking at the complications that are there, but also the promise that comes from 250 years of history.
Con il tuo 5 per 1000 puoi aiutare ActionAid a sostenere il diritto all'istruzione, al cibo, all'acqua e una vita libera dalla violenza. Puoi anche supportare le persone colpite da emergenze e conflitti. Destina il tuo 5 per 1000 ad ActionAid e scegli di sostenere tutti i diritti, perché nessun diritto è più importante di un altro. Per saperne di più, clicca il link in descrizione.
Let me ask you to look ahead and into the future. What do you think will be the defining challenges? I know it's a big question of the next 250 years. What would you put in a capsule today to be opened by Americans, let's say in 2276 year 2276? What do you think they would like to remember from this time?
Well, I think that the more things change, the more they stay the same, and I think that what an American hundreds of years in the future will look at from this time is a different flavor of the same kind of struggle that we have undertaken starting 250 years or more ago, and that is it's enshrined in the preamble of our Constitution, which is that we come together to form a more perfect union, to ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Meaning, this is something that had a beginning, and that is always looking to the future, but it doesn't really have an end. It is a process. It's a continuum. Our goal, of course, is always to provide this greater prosperity, to provide greater freedom, to make sure that we are all living in a safe and secure society. And different administrations, political administrations, will define that in the moment, in different ways. But again, like the sort of the arc of the moral universe, it is, I think, always going to be heading in that same direction. And so 250 years from now, they will look back and say, what did that look like in 2026? What were the in the moment challenges that probably at that time seemed insurmountable? The country goes through periods of incredible division and incredible unity. I go back to the Civil War as the most extreme example of division, but World War II as a time of greater unity of purpose. There's always sort of that flow in every direction. But over the long term, and certainly a couple hundred years in the future, we will hopefully be seen as having still pushed the country forward in order to get that more perfect union.
The promise of a more perfect union is always fascinating to me, so I hope the people that will listen to this podcast in 250 years can recognize themselves, and I hope they will have less challenges that we have today. Let's go back to the 4th of July itself, and let's make this a little bit more personal with your own experiences. As I told at the beginning, you grew up in Augusta, Georgia. What does the 4th of July look like there? What is the first thing that comes to mind? The smell of barbecue, the summer heat, the fireworks. Paint for us a picture of the American 4th of July for a kid from Georgia.
For sure. Well, you've said the key word, hot. The summer heat. I mean, Augusta, Georgia is no joke when it comes to heat and humidity. Everybody always jokes, it's not the heat, it's the humidity. But I would say it is both. It is both hot and humid. A lot of Georgia is very swampy, and the area around Augusta is no exception. So it would be the 4th of July for me would be kind of the real beginning of summer. School would have ended a few weeks before, but it would be we would really be getting into the meat of the summer. And a day, the 4th would usually begin with a baseball game on the television. My grandmother was a huge Brooklyn Dodgers fan. and she never forgave them for leaving Brooklyn and going to Los Angeles. So she abandoned her fandom of that and became a fan of the Atlanta team, the Atlanta Braves, just a couple hours away. And she introduced me to baseball. So my grandparents would come over and we would watch a baseball game. My grandmother and I would watch a baseball game on TV. We would have whatever the typical meal was. We would cook out, grill burgers and hot dogs and that kind of thing. And then we would go, Augusta is on the Savannah River. So we would all go as a family down to the levee, the giant mountain of dirt that had been put in hundreds of years before to stop all the flooding of downtown Augusta. And we would all sit up on the levee, which is, was there for our sort of civil security, but had become over the years more of a gathering place. And there would be fireworks sponsored by a local business run by the city of Augusta, and we would sit on the levee overlooking the river watching the fireworks go off in the sky. And one point of geography as well is that Augusta, Georgia is right on the river. The river divides Georgia from South Carolina. So we would see across the river in the other state, right across there, our South Carolinian friends and rivals watching these same fireworks. So it not only brought together the community, my family, and then the community of Augusta, but it brought together two communities across state lines. So another example of the way things are very local in the United States, but they also do cross boundaries very easily. So that would be I would sure fall asleep
you're
to the sound of fireworks.
July. If I think of Augusta today, I would also think of golf, but I don't think at the time wasn't probably so big.
It's always been big. You're absolutely right. The Masters golf tournament is played there every year. Masters Week was our spring break. So we would get out of school for Masters Week in the spring. And it has become much bigger over the years, but even then it was a big deal for sure.
Absolutely. So we Italians, we like to talk, as you know, very well, a lot about food. You have already mentioned how important is food there. Let's say that we usually relate 4th of July with the idea of barbecue. I don't know if it's like that everywhere in the United States, but for a Georgian like you, what is the one dish that absolutely has to be on the table on the 4th of July, and how important is the culture of barbecue on 4th of July?
Well, it's super important. Let me. My parents would be very upset if I didn't make one particular point, which most Americans don't understand either, and that is, barbecue is a specific kind of food and process. People all around the United States say, "Oh, we're having a barbecue," but what they mean is they're having a cookout. That means they are grilling, usually burgers and hot dogs. That is not barbecue. My father used to get very upset about that. That's how important barbecue is in Georgia and around, honestly, the Southeast, starting in Texas all the way up through North Carolina and even Southern Virginia. But I can tell you how important barbecue is in Augusta, Georgia. Our local radio station was WBBQ. So the W it means I'm an Eastern radio station, and BBQ means barbecue. It was a very, very big deal. Sconiers is the big barbecue restaurant that covers a couple of acres and has open pit barbecue going at all times. But there are kind of three dishes that I think of that had to be on the table. Two of them are not barbecue. Macaroni and cheese, which I know is offensive to Italians because it's a terrible thing to do to a piece of pasta, but we love it. Cheese grits. If you don't know what grits are, they're like polenta, sort of the cornmeal. But
I'm familiar with grits.
You know grits? All right. Excellent.
I'm also familiar with macaroni and cheese because I grew up 3 daughters in the United States. And
so you know mac and cheese as a staple of all meals, particularly for little kids. And I make a pretty mean dish of cheese grits myself, a cheese grits casserole. But the one dish that I think of as particular to the barbecue culture in Georgia and in that part of the Southeast especially is called Brunswick stew. So it originally was made usually with game meat. They would make it with rabbit or with squirrel, with tomato-based kind of a stew with a variety of vegetables thrown in there. It included okra, which is obviously it's an African vegetable that made its way into the Southeast because of the slave trade. So it really pulls together a lot of various traditions. Nowadays, they don't make it with squirrel so much. It's more leftover barbecue pork or leftover barbecue chicken. You take it, you throw it into a pot, you stir it together, and it becomes the most delicious thing that you've ever had. It's called Brunswick stew. And I think the Brunswick comes from the Sea Islands area of southeast Georgia. There's an island, Brunswick Island is one of the Sea Islands down there, which, just sort of on a side note about sort of the I would say the positive heritage of slavery was there was an entire community right there on the coast of Georgia called the Gullah community. And these were slaves who were brought over from particular countries in Western Africa and then were either escaped or were abandoned by the plantation owners. They created their own communities, their own culture. It's a Gullah or Geechee. Those are the two names that are there in Southwest Georgia and Southwest South Carolina. And they have their own traditions, including we think sort of the origin of Brunswick stew, because they took game meat, put it together with some of their traditional vegetables that they had brought over and made this most delicious and now iconic Georgia barbecue dish.
I think John Grisham wrote a novel on that story.
I think you're right. I think there was something going on in the Sea Islands for sure.
Absolutely. So you are now, we have discussed a lot about food and you have raised my interest about all these different dishes. You are now the U.S. Consul General in Milan, which means you represent America and Northern Italy, which also means that 4th of July, you celebrate Independence Day here instead of there, far from home, alongside a community of Americans who are also far from home. What does the holiday feel like when you are abroad? Does it become more intense or emotional, or do you simply try to find the best barbecue available in Milan?
I think a little bit of both, actually. Like I said before, nothing makes you more patriotic than living outside of your country and having the opportunity to explain the country to others and to share some of your traditions. So one of our traditions, of course, as diplomats is to hold an Independence Day celebration. We don't call it the 4th of July always because we hardly ever hold it on the 4th of July. It's just too difficult to always arrange it on that day. But we do invite our local contacts and friends, as well as some members of the American community, to come together to sort of share that experience. And I would say that on the one hand, it makes it more intense because it is our one opportunity to really very openly and in a very enthusiastic way celebrate what it means to be an American. We usually don't have fireworks when we're here in Milan. It's a little too dangerous, I think, but at least from our perspective. But in many parts of the world, we are able to have fireworks, but we always want to have barbecue. We want to have hamburgers and hot dogs. We want to have macaroni and cheese. Maybe I'll make some cheese grits casserole this year. And I can tell you these are some of the most special experiences that I have had as an American celebrating the 4th of July. The one, just as an example, I was at the 4th of July party in London when I was serving at our embassy there. And the party was going on, and it was we had some British artists there performing and singing. And we got word that the godfather of soul, James Brown, was at the gate because he happened to be in London. And the security guards called the ambassador and said, "Should we let him in?" "Of course, let him in." And he came through the crowd and went up to the stage, and everybody sort of stepped back, and he sang "Georgia on My Mind." It was, and I mean, I just get chills thinking about it. To bring it all back to me, because it's all about me, James Brown is from Augusta, Georgia. So I encountered him many times in my hometown of Augusta, Georgia. But then to see him, such an iconic figure in American culture and music, also being from my hometown, coming and sort of thrilling this audience of Americans and British citizens together with such an important song about Georgia, again, about my home state, was really an incredible moment. And these are the opportunities that present themselves when we are pulling together American culture overseas. People like James Brown and other prominent Americans really like that chance to join us to sort of explain a little bit about what it means to be an American.
Oh, thank you. Wrapping up this conversation, because we have already seen very different things. As I told you, we follow America closely, particularly in this podcast series, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with puzzlement, let's say. But the 4th of July is something that we watch from the outside. And my question to you again is, what would you want Italians to understand about what this day really means to Americans? Not the official version, but what is the true lived meaning of this event?
Well, you're an astute observer of the United States, and what that means a lot of the time is that you see the arguments that we get into and the divisions that our political system or our geography or our history, whatever the origin is, the divisions that brings forward. And those are always going to be sort of in the headlines. But what I would want Italians, any non-American, to understand about the 4th of July is that is literally the day, more than any other day in the calendar, when every American feels like an American and is willing to accept and share that feeling with every other American. It is when we all do the sort of same things. We get together to look at fireworks and to eat barbecue or whatever it happens to be on the table at the time, and to really relax and to take a break from focusing on those divisions, to take a little bit of time to focus on the unity. That is the real lived experience. And I know it may sound a bit, that sound a bit canned perhaps, but I have to tell you, that is absolutely what every American, I think, would say to you about the 4th of July, is that is their time to really feel like an American and to feel a member of the entire American community.
Finally, Consul General Benning, you have followed the tradition here in this podcast series of bringing an object, something that you would like to share with the audience. And I see a couple of things here. Can you tell us what did you bring?
For sure. Actually, I brought two things because I couldn't decide. The first thing I brought was a baseball. I had mentioned before that baseball is a big part of the 4th of July tradition. I knew we'd be talking about the 4th of July. So I wanted to just bring a baseball, and not just any baseball, but this particularly patriotic one, which is gussied up in the American flag, but also the Olympic rings, because baseball has become now a part of the Summer Olympic tradition. We just enjoyed sharing the Milano Cortina Winter Olympics with our Italian friends, and are looking forward to hosting the Summer Olympics in LA in 2028, where they will be playing baseball. And yes, I acknowledge that the Italian baseball team did beat the U.S. baseball team in the World Baseball Classic. I want to give credit where credit is due.
It was an absolutely achievement for us.
It was amazing.
Baseball is becoming a big sport also in Italy at this point.
Indeed.
Are you happy that
I'm thrilled.
It's growing here in Italy?
For sure. It is my sport of choice. Not that I can play it very well, but I do enjoy its pace. I enjoy its excitement. I'm particularly enjoying this year because my team, the Atlanta Braves, have the best record in baseball in the Campionato. So I'm feeling pretty good about myself. Ask me again around October whether I still feel that way, but it's a good year thus far.
It's easy to say in June, July.
Indeed,
okay.
Indeed. I don't want to.
Still a beginning.
I feel like maybe I've just jinxed my team, so I take it all back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I see an old newspaper here with framed. What is this?
So this is, we talked also a lot about my origins as a Southerner in the United States. And people in the U.S. do feel their geographic origins very strongly. But we're also as I mentioned about the 4th of July, we're actually a very unified country. And we revel in the complexity of our backgrounds. So I brought this in because this is a 1908 article from the New York Herald. So a paper published very far from my hometown of Augusta, Georgia. But there's a photo on there that includes, on the left there, the gentleman with the large mustache. That's my great-grandfather, representing my more northern origins. He was the secretary to the commissioner of police in New York at that time, and he played a prominent role as honestly the police departments of the United States were coming together as real entities. Everybody thinks of the police as something that has been around forever and ever, but in fact, it's a fairly recent development, historically speaking. And New York at the time was riven with corruption. and he was a stalwart of fighting that corruption in New York at a time that was very complicated. It was a city that was growing by leaps and bounds because of immigrants from, in his case, Ireland, but obviously I'm in Italy, and there are many
Italians coming in 1908, and they were also immediately encountering the Tammany Hall organization, which was probably part of the challenge for your.
It is, in fact, very clearly, the Tammany Hall organization was something that my grandfather and Commissioner Bingham were working very hard against. And the article is fascinating. It's too hard to read here, but it does tell some stories of attempts by corrupt officials to influence my great-grandfather and the Commissioner of Police to sort of pull them into the system, and their efforts to resist that. It made me very proud. It made me proud to be partly a New Yorker, as well as a Southerner. And, I mentioned at the beginning to one of my previous answers, we talk a lot about the Civil War. I had family members fighting on both sides of the Civil War. I have photographs of a great-great-uncle who was fighting on the northern side. Obviously, members of my family fought on the southern side too. So the United States' history is a story of overcoming the divisions based on, I think, at its very core, a shared sense of values and a shared sense of unity. The 4th of July brings that out. My great-grandfather, being a New Yorker, even though I'm fully a Southerner, brings that out. And I think that is the true strength of the United States of America.
Well, Consul General Benning, thank you so much for sharing also this personal part of the history or your personal story. Thank you for being with us and helping us understanding better what the 4th of July event is about, particularly this year. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a true pleasure.